Hello everyone and welcome back to the Triple Crown Wargaming Studio, where once again you are stuck looking at my hideous visage, the Loremaster, as I bring you another instalment of 20-0 Tactics. And this month I'm going to be talking specifically about one of my favourite Warhammer units, and that unit is Hexwraiths. So what I'm going to try to do in the video is just generally bolt through lots of the movement tactics that you can do with Hexwraiths, specifically the things that they allow you to do that other units don't. And I'm also going to kind of talk about some of the do's, some of the don'ts, and I'm going to try and finish up by just giving you a bit of a checklist of things that you should try to remember whilst you're using this unit. So if we take a look down at the table, you'll see I've got a bit of a Vampire Counts battle line arranged. I don't know what arranged is, but arranged. Now I've got some Hexwraiths here and some Hexwraiths over here, and obviously I've got Manfred flying around. Now this is the first thing that that I think is worth us making a point about with the Hexwraiths. Crucially, there is this perception that to really get the most out of them, you've got to have a super manoeuvrable general, right? And I think that with a super manoeuvrable general, they're incredible, but I don't think it's necessary. So why is that? Obviously we know Vampire Counts units can't march unless they're within 12 of their general. So obviously the temptation is to have your very manoeuvrable general with your fast cavalry Hexwraith units. After all, they are movement 8 and they are ethereal, so they can't have their movement reduced, something people forget often. And they can move through terrain. Now, in addition, these guys are spectral hunters, so they can actually move through units. Now, that's any unit, friend or foe. And when they move through enemy units, they can inflict 1 strength 5 flaming hits for every model in the unit, and those hits are no armor save. Incredible. But what I think people miss, and where I see lots of people get shocked when I use them on the table, even now, after all these years, is the fact that I can move through my own. So when we're thinking about the fact they're fast cavalry and they're vanguard, I can deploy them like this and have that really defensive looking shape with this unit, for example, tuck behind, and actually my opponent can get themselves really comfortable, and all of a sudden with my vanguard I can pop them over here, just go straight through, keep them within 12 of my general, lovely. And now all of a sudden, because that terrain's also no problem for me, as I said, I can suddenly burst through. Centre of my unit is going to be here, which is lovely because I'll reform as I do it to be able to touch on to this bad boy. So that's the first thing I want to point out, is you can move through your own units as well. And you don't have to burn when you move through, you choose. If you move through multiple units, you choose one target that gets hit with the burn attack. So you're not burning your own troops to do that. That's massive, and I'm going to come back to it when I talk about some of the other movement tactics, because you can use a vanguard and a push like that and you're in a really good place. And you didn't need to have a flying general to do that. Now if you've got a flying general who's suddenly going to bomb himself up to here, perhaps get within 12 so you can do more threat later, great. But if not, if this was my general here, would have still been fine as long as when I did that vanguard I kept myself within 12. Now that's going to bring me to my second point. At our events, the Triple Crown Wargaming events, and actually the vast majority now use our FAQ or a version of it, we say that Hexwraiths can reform inside enemy units. Now this is really important because, for example, here where I'm just touching on, if I'm just touching with one base onto him as part of my movement, I can effectively switch. So this is when we talk about the reform effect. So this would be one guy making contact and doing a burn. Now effectively in the reform effect, now that guy's done it. Second burn, third burn, fourth burn, oh, excuse me, fifth burn, right? And now I pull off my 1 inch. That's 5 burn hits. So that's where the reforming whilst you're in the enemy unit is so important. And that's where you've just got to touch on. You see us talk about that. I've got enough to touch on. You just got to have 1 inch of your movement left. 1 inch, so that you can be 1 inch away, or just over 1 inch to touch on, and just over 1 inch to touch off. You must finish 1 inch away still. You can't finish inside an enemy unit. So this is important. So this reform effect allows you to score multiple burns, as you've just seen. And something like, for example, that Snotling Pump Wagon is now very dead. 3 wounds. It's out of there. Huge. So that's my first kind of 2 points of call. Can move through, and this idea of reforming in enemy units. Now, pop them back here for a moment. There's a couple of other things that I want us to consider, particularly if we've got that less manoeuvrable general. Let's have a look at my opponent's army for a moment. Let's see, I've got a Shaman in the front of that unit, and they've got Ruby Ring, for example, and they've also got the Vindictive Glare. Thank you, cameraman Max. So I've got 2 magic missiles. This is not so hot for me. So I need to be really aware of the magic missiles my opponent's got, and that's a crucial element. I need to be really aware of the magical attacks and the magic missiles. So there's a couple of things we're going to point out. If you're fighting Truthlight Arrow Wood Elves, I'm really sorry for your loss, okay? If you're fighting other magical shooting, for example Sisters of Avalon, this is number 1, this is Tactica 101. That's -2 to hit my Hexwraiths now, because they're in hard cover, right? Similarly, if I'm fighting demons, lots of magical attacks. I know I haven't got them on the table, but let's just bear with me. Lots of magical attacks. Imagine all of my opponents got magical attacks, okay? Not good for me. What I want to do is I want to advance, and I haven't got enough trays with me, but I want to advance in such a way as to shield my Hexwraiths. So because of the thickness here, I might do this. Again, I can reform as much as I want. I'm 1 inch away. Now this is really crucial. If you've watched the flying tactics videos and the counter videos I put together there, you'll know that this is really crucial because, let's just move him up as well, and move her up. This is really crucial because now nothing that flies can charge me. So if you've got something that flies with magical attacks like Bloodthirster, can't charge my Hexwraiths. Now as the opponent gets closer, let's imagine that these are of course a nice gribbly unit of magical attacks. Say they're here, because they're pushing in, or they're getting nice and close, or even a bit further away, like here, we can go, okay, great. Well, now I'll sweep through my own, and I'll go for my reform here, and I'm out of the archetype of those. Now obviously in this instance there's a Snotling Pump Wagon here, but again, I could opt to put something there to block that off as well. I could simply opt, imagining that my units, enemy units, are all moving quite consistently and aggressively. I could instead opt to sweep this way and finish up here. Yeah. So a lot of people, what I'm driving at here, a lot of people write Hexwraiths off as soon as they're fighting something with a lot of magical attacks. There's 2 things to remember. Number 1, if it's magical shooting and you can affect it in terms of having hard cover, you have to use your units to provide that hard cover for your Hexwraiths. For me, it's a non-negotiable, right? Number 2, if it's lots of combat magical attacks, you're fighting demons, that tactic of putting the Hexwraiths behind a tough unit, something like Cryptos, a big block of skeletons, and then actually only throwing them through your own, waiting, being patient. You don't have to throw these out turn 1 to do the burns. You can wait. I've had many games where they're not burning until turn 3, turn 4. They can still have a huge impact on the game, okay? So don't feel like, oh, I've got demons, they're going to be useless, because they won't. If you use that good flying defense that we just talked about, and if you push through after you've moved up, you can find that the Hexwraiths can be really, really effective in those terms, okay? Now, I'm just going to slide my board back slightly. I know my unit's getting a little scruffy. And I'm going to talk about something else now, which is back to our flying general. So, Hellsteed Generals and Hexwraiths. Something that's really, really incredible is the fact that you can't join the Hexwraiths because they're ethereal, but if you're within 3 inches, you can have a 4+ lookout, sir. I don't want you to forget this. This is a cornerstone tactic of using Hexwraiths. I'm going to shoot my cannon at your Manfred. I'm going to roll my 4+ lookout, sir, and now suddenly it's hit a Hexwraith. And that Hexwraith, actually, as long as I've got 5 of them there, that Hexwraith can't be hurt by that cannon unless it's magical. So a lot of the time, you take the lookout sirs onto the Hexwraiths and suffer no ill effects for doing so. I think they're just about the only unit in the entire game that has a mechanic that can do something like that. It's absolutely phenomenal, right? Really, really good. Really useful. In terms of that magical attacks heavy, we talked about the magic missiles. Another thing I'm going to say at this point, because I slightly drifted with the general there, just going to just touch us back to magical attacks for a moment. I hope you're making notes. Sometimes I drift. I really feel that if you're going to take 2 units of Hexwraiths, a Dispel Scroll is 1+. For me, I never leave home without a Dispel Scroll if I've got 2 units. If I've got 1 unit, I'm not so fussed. But for 2, 100%. Because you just got to be able to stop that cheeky 1 dice magic missile at the end of the phase that could really wipe the effectiveness of the unit out. Now, in terms of the points, they're 150 points for 5. So if you're not building an army around them, which I very often don't, I'll build a good quality army, some Crypt Horrors, some Skeletons, maybe some Graveguard, maybe I'll go for some Terrorgeists, very strong, you've seen me use it on the channel many times. What I'll have is, I'll have 1 or 2 units of 5, I'll keep them cheap, keep them at 150 points. And why I do that is because I'm quite happy to let them die late game if it means protecting something that's more valuable. They're actually really cheap. If your opponent total powers a magic missile, 150 points is very recoverable. But when you fight armies like Orcs and Goblins that do not have the access to that volume of magical attack, they're just so difficult to deal with. And that is why I like the 2 smaller units. So, some do's and some don'ts. I'm going to repeat myself a little bit. Do remember that you can vanguard and move through your own units. Use that in the ways that I've shown you. Use it to lure people into a false sense of security by shoving through and then being aggressive. Use it to pull back sometimes. Got them in an aggressive position, your opponent puts a really great counter. He's got a nice unit of Sisters of Avalon over there opposite him. I don't think so. I'm going to pull them back behind something, get some hard cover. Excellent, top quality moving. Do run them behind your units to stop them getting charged by magical attacks, to protect them. Don't feel like you've got to rush and throw them in for nothing, right? If you've got that flying general and your opponent's got artillery, particularly if it's non-magical, but to be honest, even if it is most of the time, you still want to do it. Do think about that 3-inch lookout, sir. If you've got a couple of units, try and get them there. If I take the flying Manfred general, I generally like to try and take bigger units as well, maybe 7s if I can. Because then I've got a couple I can lose and keep my lookout, sir. Really, really important. Now, something that we haven't discussed is combat. It's a bit of a weird one. I talk to a lot of people, they're like, if you fight demons, Hexwraiths are useless. Why? Oh, because all the magical attacks. Well, hang on, why am I putting them in combat? Then I talk to people that say, well, you know, if you're fighting not all that heavy non-magical attacks, they're still like not great because they're only doing 5 burns because you're never going to put them in combat. There's like a weird disconnect there. Against demons, of course you don't put them in combat. Against magical attacks, you don't want to put them in combat. But actually there are a lot of times that you do want to put them in combat against lesser stuff. So for example, we went to London Legends 2023. I took 2 units of 5. I threw a unit of 5 into a unit of High Elf Archers. 20 archers with banner. Their static combat res was 4. Not great, but I charged. So I'm looking and thinking I've only got to do 3 wounds to draw this out. And if I can do 4, I've got quite a lot of attacks because I've got the 5 from the horses. You're only toughness 3. And actually, in that instance, I got the result. A few rounds of combat, I ground them down. And once you start to chip away at the static combat res, you'll find you can get a big result. So you need to be careful putting them into blocks, particularly if they're small units. Now, if this suddenly becomes one very large unit of 10, a block is less of a risk. Less. Not a nothing risk, but less of a risk because you've got another 5 supporting attacks. You've also got the fact you've got a rank, so that helps. But nonetheless, still can be a risk. So you do need to be careful about how you put them into blocks. It really should be poor quality blocks with low toughness. However, where 100% of the time you should be charging with your Hexwraiths are into things that are considered hard to deal with single models. So I'm talking about your Hell Pit Abominations without magical Warpstone Spikes, which is almost all the Hell Pit Abominations you'll fight because everyone leaves that at home because they worry about Banner of the World Dragon. I'm talking about chariots. Enemy chariots hate these. Max will tell you a million times the amount of Chaos Chariots that have just been tired out of the game and killed eventually by a unit of Hexwraiths charging them. Even if they're not killing it, so often they're just pinning it and stopping it doing its job. Monsters like Chimeras, I can't stand them. They cannot bear Hexwraiths. No regen, suddenly pinned down, no ability to do any damage, and that's something that will tear huge swathes for an undead army. Again, things like that Snotling pump wagon we've got there. Empire steam tanks, oh, they cannot bear them. I mean, they're never going to kill a steam tank, right? It's going to take forever. Doesn't matter, that steam tank's out of the game. It's not using its cannon, it's not holding something down you really care about, it's not doing its grind damage. So, the answer, the weirdly convoluted point I'm making here is do put them in combat, but really seriously think about your targets. Good combat res units are not the way to go. Look for characters. If there's characters in there, assume there's possibly a magic weapon. Be really careful, right? Think about anything that's got flaming protection. You don't really want them into that. So I'm looking at your Dragon Princes. I'm looking at your... I'm trying to think of other things.
Black and plate.
Black and plate regiments. But things like Trolls, very little static combat res. Regen, block that's going to devastate your army. Absolutely. 5 Hexwraiths in the front, love to see it.
Dragon Elder.
Nothing to worry about there. Nothing to worry about at all. So really look at those targets. Single targets, low combat res targets. Things particularly that will do big damage to your other regiments and things that have regen. They love all of that. So there's a lot of positive play there. So last couple of points before I leave you. Love you and leave you with my Tactica for Hexwraiths. First one. You can do the burn when you do a Van Hals Dance Macabre magical move. So Book of Arcane, really good synergy with these guys. But in general, just that bubbling of the magical move, so powerful. I think we did a battle report where we had Tim from the Napoleonic Wargamer come down, and he had a big unit of Empire Knights. I got 1 round of the magical move off, and 5 Wraiths wiped out basically the entire unit of Empire Knights in a circle. That is outrageous. Anything that has got high armour value, high points value, just cannot stand Hexwraiths because it's generally low model count, high everything else. They go in and they do the big damage. And don't forget, if you're getting them into combat, re-rolling the hits, rolling the wounds can really make a difference as well from those spells. So, I think I've covered the kind of core of what I like to do with them. Don't be afraid to throw them away. Do reform inside the enemy unit. If you're going to an event, do check that they're going to let you do that, because it does change how effective they are. Do think about the quality of targets you charge. Do put them in combat, but think really seriously about what you're putting them in combat against. Don't forget to move them through friendly units. It can be such a huge bonus for you. Don't forget about hard cover against magical shooting. Do put them in such a way against magical combat that it becomes very hard to charge them. And if you do those things, you're going to be in a really positive place, and you'll start to get a lot more out of them. And what I'd say is do persevere with Hexwraiths, right? Because there's so much potential in them. So have a few games. It took me quite a few games to start to really feel that I was getting something out of them. And then when I did, I was like, oh my goodness, there's so much huge potential here. There's so much I can do with this unit. So do persevere with them. And don't forget, you can get those lookout certs on your sort of your lone cavalry generals. And what's really nice about the Hellstein is that's a flying cavalry general if you've gone for that. But don't write them off if you've only gone for an on foot one. Lots of repeating at the end there, but good, all good stuff. Hopefully that's a bit of a bullet point list at the end. Whew. It's very hot. I think I've given you the hot take, if you will, on Hexwraiths. If there's anything you think I've missed, if you've got any questions, drop us a line in all of the usual places, in the comments, triplecrownwargaming.com, drop us an email on the triplecrownguys@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or on Instagram. Thank you for joining me here for another 20-0 Tactics. I hope that this has helped. Make sure you get back to the mustering ground to check out all of the other 20-0 Tactics, and in fact all that other cracking exclusive content, and I'll see you in 4 weeks time, and we'll do it all over again with something different. Remember to tag your friends and like, subscribe and share. Then head over to triplecrownwargaming.com and become a Knight of the Realm today. What are you doing, mate?
You alright?
Do it for Warhammer!